knows. Nobody knows. Mm. Yes, indeed, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Darker Than Blue. I am Jackie Lukman. I'm your host of Darker Than Blue. Welcome to our Friday, July 12th episode. It is 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time in Washington, D.C. It's a little bit over 80 degrees, been rainy and cloudy all day. Very welcome for the rain. And now it looks like we're having a problem with our audio. So let's see if we can fix that. Let's see. There we go. I hope that is a little bit better. There we go. I hope that's better. You can hear me now. I hope so. Once again, welcome to July 12th episode of Darker Than Blue. Hope you guys can hear me now. Let's checking in with the engineer to see if he can hear me, if we're doing well. Let's see. Let me check in with him. I hope you can hear me now. I hope you all in WPFW who are listening can hear my voice now. I'm Jackie Lukman. It is Darker Than Blue, July 12th, 2024. Not sure if we have audio yet. Haven't heard from the engineer. Let's see. Okay, hoping the engineer can hear me now. Hello? Can you hear me? Hoping you can hear me. Let's see. Let's get the audio. The mic is, yes, the speaker is correct. Oh, okay. Don't know what the issue is. Okay. Alrighty. I'm not sure what the problem is. The mics are showing up. Everything's showing up on my end. Not sure why we're not having audio right now. Alrighty, hoping that we can get this straight. Hoping we can. Okay, if you guys can hear me listening on Black Liberation Media, on YouTube, on Lukman Nation, on other platforms, I hope you guys can hear me. I hear the music is faded out. I hope that means that we've got audio on WPFW. I hope that is true. Fantastic. We are on. Sometimes you just got to fake it till you make it, folks. Welcome to the July 12th, 2024 episode of Darker Than Blue. It is a little after 5 p.m. here in Washington, D.C. on a slightly less sweltering. Okay, well, not slightly less sweltering. It is significantly less sweltering in Washington, D.C. today, as we've had some welcome and much needed rain, some sprinkles, some overcast cloudiness. So we got a break from the oppressive sun, the high UV rays, the heat, and the swelter. So we got a little relief today. I was able to go outside and look at my plants in my garden. Welcome the rain so much. And I am your host, Jackie Lukman. You are listening to Darker Than Blue here on WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. WPFW fighting for justice and liberation, one broadcast at a time, and Darker Than Blue, your station for soul, socialism, and really, really cool topics. One of those topics we're going to talk about today. This past weekend, there was a lot of attention paid to the NATO summit, which was held this week or the past week. And the members of NATO came into Washington, D.C. to enjoy their plans for how they're going to further destabilize the rest of the world, as the rest of the world is fighting the influence and hegemony of not just NATO, but the US and EU, which are the drivers of NATO. The rest of the world is fighting against this militaristic hegemony. And of course, the NATO members are trying really hard to figure out how they keep countries in line and not get swayed from this multipolarity and this anti-imperialist fervor that they want to tell people are being fueled by China and Russia. But let me tell you, if we look at what's going on the continent of Africa and what has been going on for a while since last year, and what took place last weekend while the NATO conference was going on here in Washington, D.C., and while there were lots and lots of anti-war counter summits and protests that happened in opposition to the NATO summit, at the same time, in the Sahel states, a very interesting development was going on. Very kind of, I don't want to say under the radar. And I titled this show that the Sahel states formed an alliance when nobody else was paying attention. Well, it's not true that nobody else was paying attention, but I can certainly say that most of the so-called left, at least in the US, was focused on NATO, as we should be, but we should not ignore what's been going on between these three countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, in the Sahel region of the African continent, because what they are doing is another, and I think probably a stronger and more troubling indication of the growth, the expansion, and I think the inability now to control the wave of anti-imperialistic sentiment and the anti-Western sentiment, the sentiment that people, particularly young people on the continent of Africa, are expressing. And that's where some of this activity comes from. So this past weekend, the heads of state of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali had their first summit of the Alliance of Sahel States. Now, there's a fantastic article that Vijay Prashad has written in People's Dispatch. You can go to it. You can find it at peoplesdispatch.org, O-R-G, and it was published on July 8th of this year. And the article, Vijay writes, is called "The Sahel Stands Up and the World Must Pay Attention." So I'm going to read just a little bit of what he put in this article, but you're going to go and read it yourself because it is really fantastic. And you need to learn this. You need to understand what is going on in the Sahel, and you need to internalize it and familiarize yourself with it. And honestly, I think almost hold it in your heart so that you can keep watching what is going on in the Sahel. So Vijay writes that on July 6th and 7th, the leaders of the three main countries in Africa's Sahel region, just south of the Sahara Desert, met in Niamey, Niger, to deepen their alliance of Sahel states. This was the first summit of the three heads of state of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, who now constitute the Confederation of the AES. This was not a hasty decision, since it had been in the works since 2023, when the leaders and their associates held meetings in Bamako in Mali, in Niamey in Niger, and in Ouagadougou, which is in Burkina Faso. In May 2024, in Niamey, the foreign ministers of the three countries had developed the elements of the confederation. After meeting with General Abdourahmani Tiani from Niger, Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop from Mali, Diop said in May, quote, "We can consider very clearly today that the Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel States is born," end quote. VJ goes on to say there is a straight line that runs from the formation of this confederation to the Pan-African sentiments that shaped the anti-colonial movements in the Sahel over 60 years ago, with the line from the African Democratic Rally formed in 1946, led by Felix Houphouët Boigny. I am sure I mispronounced that, but I tried very hard. And through the Sawaba Party in Niger, formed in 1954 and led by Djibo Bakari. In 1956, Bakari wrote that France, the old colonial ruler, needs to be told that, quote, "the overwhelming majority of the people want their interests served, and not to use the country's resources to satisfy desires of these foreign entities and their domestic proxies, to satisfy desires for luxury and power." To that end, Bakari noted, quote, "We need to grapple with our problems by ourselves and for ourselves and have the will to solve them on our own, later with the help of others, but always taking account of our African realities," end quote. The promise of that earlier generation was not met, largely due to France's continued interventions in preventing the political sovereignty of the region and in tightening its grip on the monetary policy of the Sahel. But the leaders, even those who were tied to Paris, continued to try and build platforms for regional integration, including in 1970, the Liptako Gourma Authority to develop the energy and agricultural resources in the three countries. So Vijay Prashad gives a really fantastic rundown of the history of the anti-colonial struggles in these countries in the Sahel region, to NATO's involvement in the destruction of Libya in 2011, French military intervention that continued up until very, very recently, like last year, when these countries told France to get out of their countries, and U.S. military operations that continue if they don't continue in these three countries, the U.S. is trying to stay in these three countries, even though these leaders have now told the U.S. that they need to leave. But the U.S. continues military operations in the three countries, continues to try to stay in these countries. But even if they move some of their troops out of these countries, they'll do exactly what the French did, and they will just move to another country. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But the French use of French exchequer to benefit from all financial transactions in the three countries is a problem that this federation seeks to confront, and the manipulation of anti-terrorist discourse that creates an anti-migration infrastructure that benefits Europe and the US in keeping the African people of those nations separated. Because, when you isolate people, it's easier to abuse them, right? There are no witnesses. Nobody else on the outside of your abusive relationship can see what your abuser is doing to you, particularly when they have a very strong military that controls and represses uprisings of the people. This is why the U.S. military through AFRICOM is involved in so many African nations. It's not because of terrorism. It's not because they are partners with African militaries. They are there to contain the uprisings, the move of the people, the expression for self-determination, true democracy, and sovereignty that always comes from the people, and that are always directed at the foreign and imperialist, not just foreign, but foreign and imperialist forces that have been exploiting their resources, exploiting them and their labor, keeping them poor, and then on top of that, violently repressing them with a well armed military that is usually backed and trained by the US and NATO and its EU partners. So, this alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, they seek to finally break the yoke of neocolonialism now and imperialism with this alliance. And they are continuing the Pan African tradition of previous revolutionary anti-colonial leaders. I mean, if you listen to Ibrahim Traore at all, who is the leader of Burkina Faso right now, and he was born in 1988, by the way, and that is just amazing to me because I graduated high school in 1985. So this young man who is a general in the Burkinabe military who responded to the will of the people. We have to look at these military transitions in these three countries not as coups in the way that we understand coups that the United States government engages in, that the European Union supports, that NATO supports and backs. No, because those are imperialist coups in which the imperialist nations get rid of leaders that the people in certain countries want to lead them. And why do the people usually want these particular leaders that the US and the EU and Western imperialist forces do not like? Because in almost every instance of these Western imperialist forces implementing coups against leaders that the people in African countries and other developing nations choose, because usually those leaders will say things like, the resources of this country belong to the people of this country. So we should nationalize those resources so we can take the revenue from the profits from those resources and distribute those profits to the people so that we can improve the standard of living, so that we can improve the health outcomes, so that we can provide housing, so that we can provide free health care, so that we can provide free and quality education from primary school up to whenever we want to ensure that our next generation of people are developed into full and whole and creative and critically thinking and collectively minded, human rights focused human beings. We understand that the Western powers, the capitalist dictatorship of the United States, the imperialist forces, the US, the EU, NATO, and all of their partners around the world, and those partners, by the way, are dwindling. The members, the number of allies the US and the EU have vastly are significantly overshadowed by the number of countries in the world that are opposed to that Western hegemony. And this is why these stories, these facts coming out of places that we pay little attention to actually do matter, because this information, these facts, this history being made is a representation of the move of the people, of those people, of the majority of the people around the world in how they are opposing US, EU, Western imperialist hegemony. And this alliance of Sahel states is such an incredible and I think very timely and hopeful um, uh, development, that we have to pay attention to it, because these are not the only people around the world who are rising up and challenging imperialist hegemony and demanding that the sovereignty of their people be respected by those Western capitalist dictatorships like the US and the EU. In the case of these military transitional leaders in the Sahel states, Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta in Mali, and the leader of Niger, they have all seemed to have reflected the Pan-Africanist teachings, ideologies, and some, like Ibrahim Traore, as I was saying a few minutes ago, if you listen to him speak, you will hear him quote Thomas Sankara, right? So that tradition of Pan-Africanism and anti-colonial struggle and establishing the Burkinabe people as the land of upright men. Do you understand that people who are not bowed by oppression, who will not be bent low by US and Western and French imperialism and invasion and neo-colonialism and militarism? No, even in the midst of the first anti-colonial struggles in Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara, in the midst of the struggle, said, "We are not just an oppressed people. We are the land of upright men. You cannot bend us. You cannot break us. We will not bow to you. We are upright men." And there is no way, at least for me, to look at what is happening in Burkina Faso now, listening to Ibrahim Traore, this young man, born in just 1988, who, even as a young military leader, listened not to the voice of the U.S. Puppet leader, who was the former president of Burkina Faso, but listened to the voice of the people in Burkina Faso and said they were tired of Western imperialism. They were tired of US intervention. They were tired of US installed leaders. And they were tired of ECOWAS, right? So these young military leaders did indeed overthrow the governments of their countries that were installed and supported by US and Western imperialist forces. So when we think of that, when we understand those are the people that these military leaders usurped, if you will, unseated, if you will, I have to ask myself, okay, was this really a coup in the way that we understand a coup? Or was this a military transition that is necessary, a necessary step on the path to self-determination and sovereignty? And I know for some people, this is a debate in semantics. People don't like to have this kind of a discussion. They don't want to say these kind of things because, for them, a coup is a coup is a coup. And and this is all, this is just the only thing that people are care about. That one leader was overthrown in a quote unquote undemocratic fashion by a military force. Okay, well, here's the thing. If we're talking about the leaders of these countries who were deposed, we have to go back and question whether they were actually democratically elected if we understand that they were approved by the US. So we know how elections in other countries go. When the leaders are chosen by the people and those leaders are put into the race for president, and then all of a sudden there's some funny stuff that goes on with the elections, right? There's less access to ballot boxes. There aren't as many election locations. There are military in the election locations, scaring people away, scaring away the people who would vote for the leader from among the people that they have put forward. And that is done so that the leader that the US supports can win, is allowed to win. Basically, they help him win, because if the people were allowed to vote, allowed to access the ballot box in their country without any interference, then those leaders that the US and the EU and Western imperialist forces want would never win a free and fair election in these countries. This is why the Organization for American States always goes to other countries like Venezuela. And I see you all in Black Liberation Media on YouTube. You are commenting about the elections coming up in Venezuela. And next Friday, I think we're going to talk about that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This is why the OAS always says that elections in countries that have already kicked the imperialists out and broken the yoke of direct colonialism and neocolonialism, because we need to be clear that even socialist countries like Venezuela, like Cuba, like Vietnam, like China, are still fighting against imperialist forces, like sanctions, even if they're not being invaded, even if they are not experiencing coups. And we also have to remember that the US government is still trying to depose the democratically elected governments of, or presidents of these countries, of Venezuela, of Cuba, of Chile. They're trying to get rid of these people. There have been coup attempts in Venezuela, several last year. There have been coup attempts against these military transitional leaders in these three countries in the Sahel states. We know that the US is actively planning to go to war with China. So the US is not just trying to overthrow the Chinese president. They don't just want to overthrow Xi Jinping. They want to destroy China, just like the United States is actively using Ukraine to try to destroy Russia. That the US and its EU partners, they don't want to depose Vladimir Putin because they know they can't. So they would just like to destroy Russia altogether. So while we may not have been paying much attention to what was going on in the Sahel this weekend, while NATO was having their summit in Washington, D.C., oh, you best believe they were paying attention to the Sahel summit, the very first one, also. Because did you know there is actually a Western organization that has convened itself to watch and interfere in this emerging alliance in the Sahel? It's true, folks. They call themselves Alliance Sahel, or the Sahel Alliance. Who are these people? They are, let's see, they came about in 2017, and they call themselves development partners. And I'm saying development partners and using air quotes, because it's all European and US entities, corporate and governmental entities, capitalist entities that want to exploit the resources and the people in those countries. So they formed in 2017. They launched the Sahel Alliance, which they say is an international cooperation platform to provide more and better support for development initiatives in the Sahel. And to be clear, the Sahel includes Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Chad. So 3 of those 5 countries have already formed an alliance repudiating this kind of imperialist interference, right? Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger said, not only do we not want the French military in our countries, not only do we not want the US military in our countries, we want AFRICOM out. Yes, they have said they want AFRICOM out. But they also do not need any help from any of their proxies, their corporate interests, their representatives, their political figures. They don't need any help developing their countries for their people from anyone outside of their people. Imagine that. Imagine a leader of a country saying, hey, the only people we really need for self-determination right now is us. So we have to unite with our people. From what I understand, the Alliance of Sahel States have decided to not recognize the colonially imposed borders between the three countries, meaning that there are no passport requirements for citizens of the three countries to travel between the three countries. They have free access of movement between the three countries. Why? Because these leaders have said, we are one people and we didn't implement these borders. So we're not paying attention to them. So when we look at the what these leaders are doing in opposition to this plan by these European countries, to European and US countries, to control these countries' development for the profit, not of the people of these countries, but for the profit of the foreign entities, the foreign corporate entities, the foreign governments, and the foreign private capitalists. Yeah, I am all for this alliance, and I hope it grows, because what this Sahel Alliance wants to do, they say that since its launch in 2017, listen to the people who are not the people, listen to the entities that are members of this Sahel Alliance: Germany, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, Canada, Denmark, the European Investment Bank, the European Union, France. Just kick that military out of these countries and they are part of this. Huh. Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom, the United States, the United Nations, the West African Development Bank. They are all full members of this Sahel Alliance, whose goal they claim is to provide more and better support for development initiatives in these countries. Do you think any of these entities, the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, France, the United Nations, the US, do you think those entities want to provide better support for development initiatives that are going to enrich the people of these countries, of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger? No. They want to provide support for development initiatives that will enrich themselves. The Germany, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, Canada, Denmark, they all, the United States, even the United Nations. Let's be clear that the United Nations is an imperialist and bourgeois institution that engages in its own imperialism and oppression whenever it feels like. So, this idea that justice can come from such an institution, even as we're looking to the United Nations to do something to stop a genocide, this genocide in Palestine, and Israel's involvement in the genocide in Congo, while we are looking to the United Nations to do something about these issues, we also have to be clear that there's only so much they're going to do, because the United Nations is beholden to, guess who? The United States. And none of these entities that I just mentioned are interested in the development of the infrastructure for the Sahel states in a way that would benefit the people of the Sahel states. The only development they care about is How much of the mining of the resources can they profit from using as much exploited labor and paying people as little as they possibly can in these countries? That's what this providing more and better support, though, that's the development initiatives these entities in this Sahel Alliance are backing. They go on to say 9 countries or organizations have joined the Sahel Alliance as observer members. Those countries are Japan, Belgium, Switzerland, Finland, the International Finance Corporation, huh? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Oh, but they y'all's heroes though, because they give away computers and stuff to inner city schools and lots of money to HBCUs, but they are observing the self determination activities and plans of the nations in the Sahel states. What expertise does anyone in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have to oversee the development of anybody else's country? For that matter, what expertise does anybody in the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change have in overseeing, in their ability or their right to oversee the self-determination and the development of another country that's not the UK? For that matter, what does Ireland, and I have love for Ireland because of their anti-colonial history, but this is very questionable. Ireland and the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. Now, of course, that last organization, the International Organization of Francophones, is French. But Ireland, I have to look more into this because this seems very much outside of Ireland's anti-colonial history and tradition. But we also must remember just because a country has a history of anti colonial struggle, it doesn't mean that everybody in that country today or even then was interested in engaging in the anti colonial struggle. So I am going to bet that we're not talking about just the Irish government writ large. I think we're talking about a particular segment of the Irish government, which are very much imperialists, capitalists, and neo-colonialists, and very fine with being that, as long as it's not Irish people who are on the business end of those contradictions. Do you understand what I'm saying? I hope you do, because I don't want to condemn all of the Irish people who are absolutely very very proud of their anti-colonial struggle against the British, and who have engaged in international solidarity against against imperialist and colonial forces from Palestine to Zimbabwe to Mozambique to, do you understand? So there is some parsing out here in regard to Ireland's involvement in this, I think. But that's just my observation. So this Sahel Alliance organization says that they participate in decision-making meetings of the Sahel Alliance, as well as in the work and activities of sectoral and thematic groups, including in the field in the Sahel countries. However, they do not integrate their development projects into the portfolio designated and monitored by the alliance. Yeah, that last sentence doesn't mean anything, because there's no way that you're going to have all of these government representatives and organizations involved as observer members of this entity that is made up of a bunch of foreign imperialist, capitalist, very neo-colonial governments, government representatives, and organizations. And you're not going to sit here and tell me that these people are not going to be involved in making decisions that directly impact what happens in these countries. Of course they are. They're not just observing. They're not just coming to meetings and taking notes, but to what end? Why are they taking notes? Well, they're comparing notes, and they are offering their ideas about what's a better way to exploit this situation. What's a better way for us to not just hold on to, but to expand our interests in these countries and to break up this little alliance of Sahel states and to replace it with our Sahel Alliance. You see? So check this out. While NATO is meeting here in Washington, D.C. last week, the three military transitional leaders for these three countries, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, meet to hold their first summit of Sahel states. And while NATO is meeting, you know that there was a subsection of people meeting in Washington to talk about that first summit of the Alliance of Sahel States. And you know they sent a call, a Zoom link, what's the thing, a Google video chat link, something, sent a conference call number to the members of this Sahel Alliance in order to solidify their plans to break this alliance of Sahel states, the Confederation of Sahel States, this Pan African realization of self determination and Sahel unity, and an example for Pan African anti colonial, anti imperialist struggle for us. Of course, they were meeting or had a sub meeting to talk about how to break this confederation up. And this organization, this Sahel Alliance, absolutely a part of it. Just because you've never heard of it, it does not mean they are not deeply implicated in the further destabilization of African nations and the continued exploitation, oppression, and mass murder of African people on the continent, which directly connects to us, not just through our tax dollars that are used to fund a lot of this, but also because we don't know. And just by nature of what propaganda is and how it causes people not to pay attention to things that we should be paying attention to, we give these entities and this government cover through our lack of knowledge of these things. And this is by design because we're not just uninterested in this history. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that most Africans in this country are genuinely and truly uninterested and unconcerned and don't care what's going on the continent. I think most of our people do care. I think that it is presented, the continent and what goes on in the continent is presented in this country in such a way that it obviously demonizes African people for their own lack of ability to lead, right? Because this is the narrative that we are told. Africans can't lead themselves, and that's extended to Haitians and people in Caribbean nations. Can't lead. Africans can't lead themselves, can't run countries, can't manage economies, right? Africans are not that they can't keep with a social contract. They're always rioting, right? This is the narrative that we're given about, oh, they're uncivilized, they have no culture. And we believe this because this is all we're told about the people we come from, right? To the point that we are told that we don't come from them, that we are not African, we are American, and we believe that. So, by virtue of the deep propaganda against Africa that we are subjected to from the cradle to the grave, and you know that the propaganda that pits us against our relatives on the African continent is the same kind of propaganda that is given to them by the same entity about us. Right? So when African people are saying, "Oh, Africans don't like us here," and no, it's not that they don't like us, it's that they are propagandized and indoctrinated against us the same way we are propagandized and indoctrinated against them by the same entity, the United States government, through State Department cables and travel advisories. So we internalize this idea that we Africans in this part of the diaspora and the Africans on our motherland are different people, and we're certainly not. But because we believe we're different people, some of us do think that, well, that's those people's problems, not our problems. But if you begin to examine the unrest, the oppression, the militarization, the puppet leaders, the black misleaders, the African misleaders on the continent, and you start examining how they move in their countries in regard to their people, when you start paying attention to what the people in these countries are in the streets protesting about, then you understand, oh, these aren't people who are just losing their minds. They're not just crazy and in the streets because they got nothing better to do. They're angry at US imperialism. They're angry at European imperialism. They're angry at neocolonialism. They have had enough of exploitation. They have had enough of low wages. They have had enough of having their resources stolen and the profits from their resources stolen. They've had enough of the denial of their own self-determination. They've had enough of the puppet leaders that have been propped up by the US and their Western European partners. They've had enough of the French. They've had enough of the Germans, the Belgians, those folks from Luxembourg, the Swedes. They've had enough of all of them. They are choosing to make partnerships with countries and organizations that are beneficial for them. So, yes, these countries in the Sahel states are making deals that are mutually beneficial with China, with Russia, with Turkey, with Iran. And of course, the US and the EU does not like any of that, especially not China and Iran, especially not Iran, especially now. But a people who are committed to their own self-determination and sovereignty in order to realize the true development of their country and their people, they have a right to do that. And when people in these countries know that that right is denied them, that true democracy is denied them, that their ability to vote for the leaders they choose have been denied them repeatedly, of course, people are going to take to the streets. And that is the kind of action that led to these military transitions in these three countries in Africa: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. So as we watch, and we do need to start watching closely the developments in the Sahel. As this confederation gets off the ground officially, they have a military agreement between the three countries now. So, quite literally, last year, when Ibrahim Traore said, before they officially, formally solidified the federation, when they just broke from ECOWAS last year, and ECOWAS threatened to invade Niger, and then the other countries came in and said, "Oh no! If you touch Niger, you touch us all. If you can," and they said this to ECOWAS, who doesn't actually have a military, but ECOWAS said, "We're going to invade." First, they sanctioned Niger, and they have sanctioned all of these countries. But ECOWAS was like, "We're going to invade Niger," and Burkina Faso and Mali said, "Not so fast," because if you touch one of us, you get all of us. So now that is an official military agreement between these three countries. And of course, the fear among the imperialists in the West is that Chad will join this federation, Mauritania might join this federation, and it might spread beyond the Sahel states. So, of course, the Western powers, including NATO and the United Nations and all of these other countries and organizations that I mentioned, of course, they want to destroy this alliance of Sahel states in the motherland. This is why we have to pay very close attention to what is happening. It doesn't matter how little this is reported on in corporate media outlets in this country. This is why WPFW exists. This is why Lukman Nation exists. This is why Darker Than Blue exists. This is why Black Liberation Media exists. This is why the Black Alliance for Peace exists, and Hood Communist, and Black Agenda Report, and People's Dispatch, and all of these alternative outlets for news, all of the people that we talk to on this show to bring you African Newswire, to bring you information that you're not going to get from the empire, from the state, because they don't want you to fight against it with your relatives around the world, particularly on the continent, on our continent, on our homeland. They don't want us to fight with our kin against them. Do you know why? Because we will win. And that's the thing they don't want to happen. They're not afraid that we will win. They know we will win. If the imperialists did not know that we will win, because there are more of us than them, ladies and gentlemen, sheer numbers, and we have the mandate for freedom and liberation. The truth wins all the time. And what do we say in the streets? The people united will never be defeated. The imperialists know this. So this is why they keep this information from us. The only time you'll see them or hear them reporting about anything going on in these countries is when they cover a protest and they lie about it. So that's why we have to pay attention to these issues, while we, at the same time, have to pay attention to what NATO is doing and what the US is doing with all of its military commands all over the world: AFRICOM, SouthCom, PacificCom, SpaceCom, EUCOM, all of that, right? We have to pay attention to all of that. We have to pay attention to what's going on in Ukraine. We have to pay attention to what the US is about to do to China with Taiwan's help. We have to pay attention to what the US is about to do to the DPRK with South Korea's help. All of this. Oh, yes, the job of a revolutionary and an anti-imperialist is difficult. It is time consuming. It requires a lot of reading, and it requires a lot of discipline. But freedom and liberation for all people, liberation, self-determination, justice, and peace for all humanity, isn't that worth it? Is not that goal, that end for all of us, worth the effort? And yeah, sometimes the tiredness, the body aches, the injuries, the arrests, the sweat, the tears, sometimes the blood. Isn't it worth it though? I think it is. So that's why we here in Darker Than Blue will continue to be here. And if you've noticed, I'm here by myself today, and I will be by myself for a bit because my comrade and friend Sean Blackman is taking a break. He's doing some other stuff, as sometimes we have to do because this work is a lot. And sometimes, in order to be better revolutionaries, we need to take a break so we can last for the marathon, because that's what this is. It's not a sprint. So I will be your host for Darker Than Blue, solo for a bit, but we'll still be here. We'll still be bringing you this news. We will still be fighting. And as I always say, a luta continua, the struggle continues. But if we keep fighting, my friends, and I promise you this is true, and the history that preceded the Confederation of the Sahel States and the history they are making right now confirms this for me. If we keep fighting, victory is certain. Victory acerta. Join us next week here on Darker Than Blue, WPFW 89.3 in Washington, D.C., the DMV area. If you're online, you can't get us on your radio, you can go to WPFW89.3.org, or you can go to Black Liberation Media on YouTube and check us out on video at the same time. Thank you all for joining me. Stay tuned for Garland Nixon with News Views. See you all next week. Peace.